whenever you're ready, Zoe. Now it's officially midnight.
It's officially midnight. It's officially time for our second Dialogue at Dusk. First proper interview with our lovely host, Brooks Barber. Brooks Barber, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Zoe?
I'm doing great. And of course, we also have Matthew here.
Hello. I don't get the lovely intro. It's here's Matthew, which is fine. I mean, I appreciate Brooks is way cooler and amazing. So like, I'm all for it. Yeah.
I don't host very often.
Oh, and of course, we also have the amazing, also lovely Zoe Allred here with us tonight. Great having you here, Zoe. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. So today we are going to be talking about breaching the veil. What do we mean by breaching the veil? We mean games that are meant to model reality, how games affect reality, how reality affects games, like how these things that are meant to be fictional representations of reality end up permeating the veil and affecting reality. We decided to make that the talk for today because Brooks Barber is particularly experienced with historical games and works a lot in that field. So it felt like an appropriate topic for today. So speaking of historical games, what are some of your favorite examples?
Yeah, let's breach the veil. My favorite examples of historical games. That's a tough one. I think one of my favorite games ever of all time is a historical game, which is Pax Pamir by Cole Wehrle, um, which is, I guess, a game in which players are not in real strong positions of power. They're kind of navigating Afghanistan while the Russian and British empires, as well as like local Afghan folks, compete for control of that region. And so you're trying to like worm your way into the right person's pocket just at the right opportunistic moment to be in the position to kind of benefit from whatever that greater power is doing. And that's what the game is. It's really fascinating. I think it's really true to the history itself in terms of like these local tribal leaders in Afghanistan trying to navigate what was, the Great Game is what it was called. This political power play and military power play over this region in Central Asia. So that game does some interesting stuff with what players are trying to navigate in it. I think another one I would say that I've gotten into recently that I've really been enjoying are there's one called Maria, which is about the War of Austrian Succession. It's a three-player game that is really wild. I don't know. Have y'all ever played Maria? Either of you?
I have
I've
not.
never even heard of it.
No, you should check it out because there's three players, but one of the players controls two different factions because there's four factions that are interesting here. There's France, there's Austria, there's Prussia, and then there's what's called the Pragmatic Army. The Pragmatic Army and the Austrians are actually kind of allies. They're on the same team, but they're not controlled by the same player. And so those players have to negotiate on what each of them is doing in terms of moving their armies around and trying to take territories and who they can attack and things like that. So it's really fascinating in all of that. But even more so, the game is really simple. It's point to point movement. So you kind of move your armies around and it's secret. You have like a little pad that you're writing how many of like armies are in each disc or whatever, and you're moving these discs around. But the map is split into this grid that is in each little square is associated with a suit in the card deck. And so you have these cards that you're drawing throughout the game, and whatever square you're in, hearts or diamonds or spades or clubs or whatever, that's the card you can play when you actually do go to battle. So you're trying to position yourself to take over these various territories, but you have to make sure that you are in the right position, not just kind of, I guess, tactically, but also to make sure that you have the cards to play to actually win a fight if you get into one. So it's this really simple kind of card play system, and but it models this weird, intricate war that happened um,
Hmm.
really, really well. So I think y'all should check it out. I think you would really like it. That weirdness between two players kind of controlling a similar faction is really cool. And then
Oh,
yeah, and then the third one I would say is Sekigahara, which is an old game about wars about in feudal Japan, and it's kind of a block game where you're secretly moving your blocks around, your armies around, and there's intricate rules around how you can move and what you can do. But I think that game does a really good job of again kind of having this simplistic card play and card economy
Hmm.
that you're trying to manage as you go throughout. As you, it's almost as if the cards themselves are the supply that your armies have in order to move across the map and do certain things. And it's all hidden from each other, right? So it's just two players, so you can't see who has what in each army they're moving. So you can only see the back of it. So that fog of war stuff is always really hard to do, but I think that game does a really good job of it. So those are three I've been enjoying lately. Pax Pamir will always be one of my top five games. Maria is really, really great. And Sekigahara I played recently that is a lot of fun.
but you've done a really good job of selling Maria to me because that sounds very interesting. But
Check it
I
out.
have to be careful because like when you say it has like simple card play, I feel like we're operating on like very different like levels. I remember one time asking you for recommendations of games that modeled like I think like morale and like citizens being displeased with like you doing war crimes and something like that. And you're like, here's some recommendations. This one's on the simpler side that I looked up. It was like a 3 or like 4 hour game.
Hey, that's a 3 or 4 hour game of simple mechanics. So, that doesn't, length of time does not mean, complexity. You could be doing really, simple, easy, things that whole range. But I was actually going to kind of just bounce off Zoe here. I love hearing, Brooks, I love it when you pitch a historical game. I hear you do it over text and I hear you do it audibly. And of all the people in the world have ever pitched me historical games or talked about them, you make me so excited to play them. But I think it always you're always great at capturing the story of what's happening as opposed to telling me you move a piece and the piece does this and you get a carrot for that and then you spend you really sell the story behind it, which is always very appealing. And I think even I'm going to transition here even with a game that you worked on, which I've been several of your games I've worked on. I've always found that you're fantastic at celebrating what these games are about through the pitch. And I don't mean celebrate like we're having a party, just like that's the story, that's the focus, and then from there I'm sold. Now I want to interact with the experience. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, for me, that's what historical games are. Honestly, that's why I think I'm drawn to them so much, is it's about the story of what's going on. The mechanics just should support that. And I'm not a person who's super into the some historical war games that are like, I'm gonna play out the nuances of this specific battle from the Civil War or whatever. It's not as appealing to me. Although I think even if you know that history and you know what's going on there, even those games can tell a story in a way to people who are playing them. But I think it requires a lot deeper kind of historical knowledge than some of the games that I like to play. I think the ones that I enjoy are the ones that where that story is easier to access and much more on the surface for anybody approaching it, not just folks who have come in it with that like prerequisite of historical knowledge about that specific topic.
Hmm.
As like sort of preparation for this dialogue, I've been re-listening to like some stuff from Kelly Clancy and rereading some of the chapters from her book Playing with Reality. And I'm always like thinking about how we like created all these models like with these games of off of like assumptions of how like game theory, right? Like how it
Mhm.
assumes that people like you could like math out how people should behave like given like certain criteria and such like that. So um I guess what I'm trying to get around to is like how do you feel like these games generally do in modeling how like these interactions played out and how uh like these different agents or motivated or even how these agents are embodied, I guess, because sometimes it's like you're playing as like a nation, but like
Mhm.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
No,
what
it's
do
a
you
great
think?
question. I mean, I think my answer is tough because I think it depends on the game and the quality of the game, right? Like the quality of the design. If it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, I think it models those things really, really well and in some really interesting ways. But there's always a balance there, um, as with any design, I think, where you're trying to represent the history, but you have to represent it in a way that is playable and accessible to people. And there's been a long history of like wargaming is some of the original tabletop gaming, right? And historical gaming is some of the original tabletop design, and it's been around a long time. And even in the modern hobby, places like Avalon Hill and SPI were around in the 60s and 70s and 80s, um, pumping out weird little niche magazine type games, right? And I think that it kind of depends on how how that person is trying to take what that historical event is about and bring it to life inside the game. And you have to leave things behind. You have to um, whittle that down. But I think some people are notorious for throwing everything in it and making it as complex as possible. Um, there's Richard Berg, for example, is like the campaign for North Africa is almost like
Yeah.
a meme at this point because if you look at it on BGG, it says it takes like 3,600 hours to play or something crazy, because it's so nuanced and it's so ridiculous and all this stuff. But I think Amabel Holland has rightly pointed out that like to a certain extent, Berg is trolling people with that design, right? Like he's putting in rules about how much water the Italian military has to carry because they make pasta as they move throughout World War II, and you have to calculate movement speed based on that for the Italians separately from other troops and things like that. So like that's the level that like he's almost I think lampooning or satirizing the nuances that you can get trapped in when trying to model a historical event because
Mm.
there's so much detail in it. And so, but that is not a model, right? That's a simulation of like the history. And I think a really strong historical game will take that nuance and be able to abstract it to the point that it represents the feeling and the I guess the overall tone of what's going on there in a way that players can still get it without having to, turn to a table that's got, I don't know how many entries on it because you rolled a die for one specific thing. So I think there's definitely war games that do that more simulation side of things, and I think that those have value in certain arenas. But I think in my preference is to find historical games that abstract that to the point that anybody could sit down and play that game. I've introduced I'm well known in my local gaming circles here for bringing the weird historical games because very few other people around me are super into them. And so like some of those are, more mainstream things by Cole Worley, things like, Pax Premier, but Molly House. Most recently, I've been taking Molly House around to show everybody how that works. And that's a game that people can sit down and play, right? It's got a lot of Euro style mechanics and it's and the theme really comes through. And I always encourage people to kind of almost role play in that game a little bit to try to like you have to get into like I'm throwing a party, right? I'm going to this thing, I'm throwing a party, we're having a good time. And if you're not getting into it in that way, you're not engaging with it on that level, then I don't think you're doing the game justice. So I think at their best, games find that good balance of abstraction and simulation and find where that meets, which is really, really hard to do.
I'm really
That's a
interested.
long-winded answer.
No, no, it was a great answer. I'm really interested because we were talking about for call once again. Congratulations on Sykes-Picot, amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I love the game. I play tested a few times. It was great to see its journey and see it get across that finish line you were hoping to get it across. And Holland Spiel's a great publisher, so
Mhm.
it's got a great home. I was very interested though, from the outset, and obviously Zoe and I, of course, interested in this, in the fact that it is offering a multi-victor experience in this historical setting. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was, making a historical game accessible. I think one of the more common criticisms I've heard over these sort of multi-victor games that designers like ourselves are starting to kind of get into, it's that they may not be that accessible. They do add extra complexity. How did you kind of balance that with your historical framing? How were you able to navigate that?
Yeah, that's interesting because I I see why people would say that, but I disagree. I don't think it inherently adds an extra complexity. I think it's just different. But so for Sykes-Picot, um, the end game stuff is very simple. You can end in one of three ways. You can tie, like you both achieve the same, but it all revolves around one simple goal, which is try to achieve your own diplomatic agendas, right? You have a hand of three at any given moment. Your agendas are identical to your counterparts, and so um, you kind of can game theory a little bit who's going for what because you have these identical six card decks. And you know, at the end of the game, you just count up how many of those you did, and if somebody got more than the other person, then they win because they did more, they achieved more than the other person tried to achieve. If you tied, then great, you share your victory. You both achieved something in this diplomatic negotiation. And if neither of you got anything, then you're both losers because you should have negotiated more and maybe aren't the best diplomats in the world. And so I think, although there's kind of branching, I think a lot of that complexity comes down to in unranked games comes down to that kind of branching end game stuff that can emerge and how to wrap your head around it. I still have trouble figuring out things like Pax Penning and how to read the game state as it's going and where I stand relative to other people, like in the different ways that those in-game things can intersect. That is complex. I understand
Mm,
why that people might say that, but I think are ways to take a simple in-game condition and turn it into an unranked one in like Sykes-Picot, I think does that, right? Because
mm,
it's you're still just very quickly evaluating what you accomplished, and then there's only one of three ways that ends. And I think that only works in Sykes-Picot because the game allows players to openly choose how they want to engage with it. You can be combative or you can be cooperative. It's interesting because when I play with like Zoe, for example, or you, Matthew, like people, y'all talk a lot. You're very open. You negotiate a lot with the other player. Sometimes that leads towards a more combative approach if the player's not working with you, but frequently it leads to, you achieve something. But when I took it to kind of more historical war game conventions and played it, people were immediately kind of entrenched in
mm.
their zero sum mentality of like, this is a historical war game. I need to win. So I'm not going to say a word. I'm going to secretly try to do my thing. And that just inevitably leads to a gnarled mess
Right.
on the map that doesn't let anybody accomplish anything. So I think that simpler in-game condition is somewhat supported by kind of the open communication the game allows between the players.
Mm. uh, Maybe you kind of tackled this a little bit, but why
Mhm.
build this as a game that has those different endings as opposed to like say a single victor game? Because you mentioned like in the historical setting of players, like people were just like going for that zero
Yeah.
sum outcome, right? So why did you do that as opposed to like a single victor framing?
Yeah, because I think it's more realistic. I mean, it's fundamentally a diplomatic negotiation, right?
Mm,
And I
yep.
think, it depends on your kind of approach to diplomacy, right? And I've talked with folks in that community, like it depends on what diplomatic school you belong to. Some people um, are very much I have to win. It's a zero sum game. Like Trump is very much like that, right? For example, and his administration is very much like that in his foreign relations. But to me, I don't think that's what was going on with Sykes-Picot. I don't think they were going into that room to try to get one over on each other. They were approaching that in a more collaborative way. And
Mm,
I think that model is more appropriate to the historical event itself. And frankly, to the kind of diplomacy I think is more effective.
mm-hmm.
But I like that the game allows players the room to do it both ways. You can play it as a zero sum game. It just doesn't work very well in terms of achieving your goals. It's really tough. You have to You might eke out one of the agendas if you do it that way. So I think to me that history itself in most historical events, I mean, and I think that's also a flaw of many historical and war games, is that like even in many war settings, although there may be a clear victor and a clear kind of loser, it's not so zero sum as like something like Risk or Axis and Allies would suggest, where it's like you have to completely annihilate the other player,
Hmm.
right? That's not how most war ends. Usually it's, oh, we kind of fought over this tiny piece of territory for a little while, and then we realized that we wanted to stop doing this because of economic pressure or because of other things on another border or because of our leader died or whatever. So now we need to negotiate some sort of tribute system, right? And so I don't think that most historical events are zero sum in the way that games portray them.
Hmm.
I think that's a very militaristic mindset that gets applied to it sometimes that shouldn't be in all cases.
Awesome. That's really
Yeah,
appreciate your insight there.
Mhm.
yeah, that's I I think that it's like so fitting that it's for that your game is like a negotiation game and that it's unranked. It really feels like a perfect kind of setting for like um to demonstrate that like those mechanics because and I think it's really fascinating that you say that like in a war game or setting players approached it like other like competitive like war
Mhm.
games. Um, I just find that very fascinating.
Yeah.
It reminds
No,
me
I
of
did
how
too.
like
It was
they
yeah.
S-
For me too, it was very fascinating because I came from testing it primarily at like Protospiel and BMG and with y'all and a group of folks that I think are more in touch with kind of the unranked game stuff that's going on. And so when I took it into that other setting, I didn't know what to expect, but it was really interesting to me to watch because I just kind of quietly sat there and watched them just fumble through it. Because the game, I think, also reinforces whenever you're doing that, because ultimately you're coloring in these spaces on the map of the Middle East, right? And if you're not cooperative, if you really go after each other, the physical artifact you're left with is this kind of mess of a map that you've made that I think reflects what it would look
mm,
like if you didn't work together in this scenario, right? Like trying to claim very specific territories and things like that, and trying to create this unsustainable political situation in the Middle East whenever you're really combative about it. Whereas if you're more cooperative, that tends to look like the map ultimately reflects that too. Like the in game, the end state of that map looks a little cleaner. It looks like you kind of worked around each other a little bit. So I think the physical components of the game and the mechanisms also kind of reinforce that, which I'm really happy with. That was totally unintentional. I kind of lucked into that one, but it um, as I found that happening, I definitely leaned into that in the design.
that excites me a lot. Just kind of hearing that kind of functions so well in the design space because I think one of my more immediate responses to some of the things we were talking about earlier is like, well, how can folks communicate collaboration silently, right? And it sounds like the game kind of pushes you in that direction by making it very clear. Look, you're you're being a menace on this map. You're fighting over everything, and look what that's brought you, right? And I imagine there's kind of a sort of a hope there that like if I like in that game space, maybe if I silently gave up something to my the other player, I imagine even if I said nothing, that might be enough for them to go,
Mhm.
wait a second, that's a really bad move for you. Why are you doing that? And maybe they would. I'd be interested to see if some of those silent negotiations start taking place just through the mechanics, because like you said, it's
Mhm.
so in one game it paints such a it sounds like a detrimental result if you're being at least more likely painting a detrimental result if you're being super mean to one another. So that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's got some cool things going on. I'm excited for people to play it and check it out and see what they think about it. So I'm really happy that it's out.
so I kind of inferred this, but I just wanted to double check that I'm correct. But like in your game, there's like there's multiple objectives that you could be achieving through play. And the impression I'm getting is that like with these competitive war gamer scenarios, people are achieving much fewer, if any, of these objectives. And that's so it, like
Yeah, it
I
might.
talk
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that like when I talk about these games, I talk about how it feels like a muscle that you're exercising. And I
Mm.
feel like in our community of people who work on these unranked games, we've developed like that muscle for like recognizing like, okay, like how can we negotiate like us both getting some things that we want. And then in this other community, they have not exercised that muscle and they really struggle to get those objectives. Does that sound like something that we're seeing here, or?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think so. I will also admit I played it with like six people, so like I don't want to paint the whole wargaming
Yeah,
community
yeah.
with this
Small
broad
That's
brush.
sample
it. It's
size.
been
But
proven. Sorry.
yeah,
Science.
but I do definitely think that there is a, a habitual thing to thinking around like an unranked game and how to approach it, right? Because definitely the game doesn't punish you for being more combative, but it definitely is much harder to achieve your agendas when you are not collaborating in some way or another. And that is
Yeah.
definitely intentional in the design of it. And so my what I don't know is if people would come back to it for a second or third play or whatever, and maybe approach it differently to see if they could do it differently. Because there are definitely lots of historical games and lots of war games that do something similar in terms of um, not necessarily unrankedness, but I think multi-victor stuff um, and other things like that, right? So, like things like Molly House, right? Like there's definitely options for multi-victors there. And so I think that is something that's also emerging in the community, although it is still quite uncommon, I think, in wargaming and historical gaming.
Something
The,
that. Oh, go ahead, Zoe.
oh, did you say that there's multi-victor options in Molly House?
Is that not
I thought
true?
there
I'm
were.
trying to think. I thought that there were. Is it
I
just one? Is it just one winner?
I think I might be wrong because it's changed a lot between the times I play tested, but I thought it was whoever had like the most joy was like the
It is who
winner.
has the most joy. You're right. No, you're
Mm.
right. Yeah, it
But I
is
think
just one
I
one
think
person winning.
it's been just some folks have mentioned that it almost feels like it could be a multi-victor type
Yeah.
experience. Something that we've talked about a couple times in I think in the Discord here and on social media is vulnerability. And so I know we're kind of
Mm.
keep continuing to come back to the players, but something I've certainly noticed in the multi-victor and victorless and unranked experience of games that I've had overall is that there is, I think, outside of the zero sum stuff, I think there's a natural fear of showing vulnerability, which means I need to put my fate to a degree in the hands of someone else. And so I imagine that can also be a scary thing in a negotiation game too, to an extent. I'm kind of curious, just because that's something I've picked on. What are some of the things that you started noticing as you kind of developed this designer muscle around this sort of unranked game, and maybe other games you've worked on that sort of fit within that unranked experience?
Yeah, I think I realized uh, what this taught me was it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Like, because when I first started thinking about unranked games and multi-victor stuff and those kinds of things, it felt like it would be really difficult to achieve that and still make a game that was fun and engaging and all those things. And Sykes-Picot taught me that that's not the case because from the moment I threw it on the table, people really liked it. I
Hmm.
got positive feedback immediately, and it really came together very quickly as a design. Maybe over the matter of I think 6 months, it came together and got
It's
signed.
awesome.
And I think that it, so it taught me that it was easier to do than I thought, and that it taught me to look for opportunities to let that part of a design breathe where it makes sense, right? And so I almost immediately kind of looked at several other ideas I was having and thought about, is this actually a single victor type of game or is there more to it? than that. And I have um one, two, probably two or three other games now that would fit probably unranked categories
Hmm.
that maybe before prior to this experience would not have in many ways. Um, and I think it also taught me kind of giving players the agency to choose their own paths can go a long way in a game if you can get it to work right. I don't think we have to. Some games I think require you to be on rails a little bit, but I think unranked games specifically have a lot more agency, and you have to find the right ways to control that agency or constrain it. Otherwise, it's a little too loose. But if you can find those right ways, giving the players the agency to operate within that space that you're creating for them goes a really long way towards making that unranked like experience really really powerful, I think. And I think we've talked about this before, Matthew and Zoe, like the when players make a decision to do something mean to someone else, it means a lot more if they have the option not to,
Yeah.
right? So like in a traditional Euro game, it's all about optimizing your play and scoring the most net points, right? Like, do I just score 20 points for myself, or do I do this other thing that hurts someone else? And so I have a net of 25 points or whatever. I'm going to do the mean thing, but that's purely in the name of the game is incentivizing me to get as many points as I can and as many more points than you as I can. But if you have an option not to do that and still win, and you choose to do that mean thing, um, then it can be an even more powerful decision, right?
Yeah.
And I think the same goes for what you're saying about vulnerability. Like if I have secured like we were playing a game the other day, Matthew, you had secured your victory condition and you made yourself vulnerable to me as a player, I could have stolen your victory from you,
Hmm.
but I chose not, right? And so I think those games really open up those interesting questions around how players are going to choose to engage with that and what that does narratively really brings a lot to the table because the mechanics and the player choices within those mechanics are um, opening up a lot more narrative possibility, in my opinion.
Awesome. Love that answer. Thank you.
Mhm.
You had mentioned a couple other games that you were working on that might fall under the unranked umbrella. Was Draconia one of those?
Yeah, Draconian is one of them. Yeah.
I um I really love that game. From like the moment like I tried it, I was like, God damn, this is such a good.
Yeah.
It's
I had
like
a turn
it's
two
like a
win in that game that Brooks stole from me in a playtest, just washed it away from me. Cause the language wasn't right. Like a T2 win just taken from me.
Yeah.
Sorry. Had to
Well,
rant.
Matthew broke it. Matthew broke it on turn two, and I had to change the rule mid play test so that he couldn't break it.
Yeah,
So
that's
sorry,
extremely
man.
fair. Extremely fair.
Yeah, but that's
literally
a weird
broke the
little game.
game.
It's a weird little game that I'm still working on that I'm excited about, but we'll see. It's kind of based on blackjack style mechanics, like a moving target blackjack thing. So
What are in the current iteration, what are the different outcomes? Like because like last time I played it, there's like a potential for a revolution against the dragon
Mhm.
and of like winning the dragon's throne and what was the other ones? I forget.
Yeah. So right now there's three options, and the difference now, Zoe, since you last played it, is that you choose what you want to do at the beginning of the game. You choose whether you're going to be
Okay.
a usurper, where you try to take over the throne from the Dragon King. You choose what, or you're going to be a royalist, where you try to support the Dragon King in consolidating power, or you choose whether you're going to be a revolutionary, where you support the kind of rebellion and overthrow the aristocracy or whatever. So you choose that at the beginning of the game. And so now it's multi-victor in the sense that other people have chosen things, but you might all be on the same team and not know it. So you kind of have to suss out who's trying to do what and who is an ally and who's not based on their gameplay. And that's the really tricky part I haven't nailed yet because it kind of the moves are really easy to telegraph. Those secret roles are easy to telegraph in the current version of the game. So I'm trying to find more subtle ways to integrate that stuff in so people don't know exactly what people are going for right away.
Oh, that would be really cool if you pull that off, because it's like a hidden role game, but you get to choose the role instead of like getting randomly dealt it,
Yeah.
and it's feasible for the game to work with everybody, and like Yeah, that would be really good, nice. I particularly like social deduction games, and this sounds
I
that tickles
love
my
I
fancy.
love a start of game choice when you have to
Hmm.
you have to contend with the consequences of your own actions later on when you realize the implications of that choice. It's always a good time. Um,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
so we'll see. I'm gonna have that one at Protospiel Online next weekend, so I'm gonna be doing a lot of testing on that one.
nice.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Protospiel Online, one of my favorite online like playtesting events. Yeah, that's coming up starting this Friday, right?
Yeah.
For those who
Very
are
cool.
watching a
Very cool.
recording of this, it may not be on the this Friday of the week you're watching this, so apologies. That you're like,
May
whoa,
16th.
yeah,
May 16th to 18th,
there we go,
2025.
there we go, yeah. Um, but yeah, no, it's a great event. I'm excited to be there as well. I'm excited to break your game on turn two again, so I will find a way.
Yep, let's do it.
In chat, actually, we have the person that runs Protospiel Online. She mentioned him sounds like real life, trying to figure out who is supportive and navigate showing others whether they can believe you're supportive. 100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Um, do you have I guess kind of talking about like your sort of design journey up till now. Do you find that as you're making these games, you mentioned that you're kind of looking, you went through some of your other games to see if they would fit that unranked category. How do you make the decision as a designer whether or not you want to make a game unranked? Like, what do you look for? What do you think about? How are you kind of navigating that decision space? Because I know, like, I personally have mentioned this before. Like, while I enjoy making these unranked games and exploring them now more than ever, if I find a game that I think is going to be a single victor game, I'm going to make it a single victor game, right? So what are
Mhm.
some of the things that you try to decide on as a designer?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I try to do with any design is figure out who the players are and what personas they're occupying
Mm-hmm.
and what their goals are in the game, right? And that's part of the reason I love historical design so much is that it's fun to kind of read the history and figure out like who who in this story has the most agency to play with
Mm-hmm.
and what are they trying to accomplish and what are they trying to like figure out. And so once I figure that out, then that can really inform like, is it possible if these are my players, is it possible for multiple of them to achieve a goal at the same time? If it's not, if it's very much a zero sum thing, then it's a single victor game. Like one of my other games that's historically informed is Spindletop. It's a very Euro style kind of oil thing where you're creating oil companies in early 20th century Texas and stuff. And that's very much not a multi-victor game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because whoever makes the biggest, best oil company, right, is going to win because that's kind of the way the world worked back then, and it was very cutthroat and all that stuff. So there's definitely scenarios in which that doesn't make sense, and so but figuring out that player piece and their what they're striving for, the goal piece is also really important. Um, it helps inform that decision about is it an unranked style game or is it a single victor type game? But yeah, there's definitely it just kind of depends on the design.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Um, Maybe a bit of a segue here, but also very curious, and I imagine especially designers listening to this will have. I feel like they have this question a lot, whether or not we get it a lot currently. What was it like pitching an unranked game? Certainly, Zoe and I, we've done some digging to find some games that are in a published state that fit within an unranked category. But I do know from experience that one of the most common things I hear is like, well, how are these games going to exist? Like, who's going to buy
Yeah.
this? All that kind of nonsense, right? And so, I was curious what that journey was like for you, and if you had any words of wisdom for designers listening in on that.
I mean, not really, because I got lucky. Honestly, I got really lucky because I, I at a certain point in the game's design, I thought this would be a really good game for Hollandspiel,
Mm,
and yeah, I felt like it just was a natural fit with what they're doing, and so I just kind of when I thought the game was ready, I fired off an email to their pitch email that they have on their website. Um, and even on the website, it says that we may take multiple weeks to respond. We get a lot of pitches, that kind of stuff. And the next morning, they wrote me back and they were like, "Yeah, we want to look at this." So I got super lucky, and I mailed it off to them, and they spent some time with it, playing it and stuff over the next month or two, and then they decided to publish it. So for me, pitching an unranked game was super easy because I just happened to find the right publisher who was interested in the subject and interested in the design, and got super lucky. So I don't think I have super words of wisdom there. I wish I did, but I don't
I
at
mean,
this moment in time.
honestly, if anything, that sounds refreshing to me to hear because to me it just sounds like
Hmm.
you considered a publisher that felt right for your game. You communicated it, and yeah, yeah, sure, you getting lucky, sure, being in the right place in the right time for sure, but it sounds like at the very
Hmm.
least you moved it toward a home that seemed like a good fit. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe my advice would be just like pitch it like you would any other game. Just be confident in the design, know what you're doing, and represent yourself and the game as positively as you can.
Hmm.
Don't apologize or make excuses or draw like create caveats for what you're doing. Just pitch the game. And if you put that forward and put that energy forward, I think people will respond to it. Some people may be like, I don't know what this is. What are you doing? If that's the case, then they're not the right publisher for you. And is probably another publisher out there that's more receptive in other ways. So
Love it. Cool.
that I guess that would be my advice. I don't know how profound it is, but there you go. Just pitch
It's
it like you would any other game.
super profound. We're gonna chisel it on some stone after this. It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
Find yourself a publisher that's not afraid of unranked games, like Holland
Yeah.
Spiel.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's more of them than people realize. I think if it's the right game, the right theme, you have the right relationship, like any other design, um, I think some publishers anyway, are willing to take more risks than people realize. It just takes a lot of effort and time to like get get to the point where you can have those conversations with them.
Hmm. That makes sense. Um, oh, sorry.
Well,
Please.
to bring it back around to our breaching the veil topic, we've talked about how a lot of these games are like inspired by history and how more or less we think they model like real historical events. But how do you feel like our games uh, infect reality? How do our games impact reality? Do you do you feel like these games impact the way people are going to form history in the future?
I think some can. So like I think you mentioned what playing with reality. I'm looking over here because I have it on my bookshelf right here. Earlier, I think that book by Kelly Clancy does a really good job explaining kind of the back and forth, like osmosis between wargaming and real life, throughout the past several hundred years. And so I think that I have to acknowledge the very real kind of professional wargaming scene that exists, which is mostly, you know, um, career people creating war games as a way to model out various conflicts that may or may not occur. And those conflicts may be hot, they may be cold, they may be economic, they may be trade wars. There's all different models, I think, that militaries use to model various different situations that they might find themselves in different parts of the world. And I think that is, you know, different people feel different ways about the fact that there is a very strong connection between that professional wargaming community and the hobby kind of historical and wargaming community. Those things are very much intertwined in a lot of ways. Some of the
Mhm.
people who design some of the most well-known historical and war games are people who have worked in the government or have worked in defense contracting or who are professional wargamers themselves, things like that. And so there's very much an overlap there. So I think there's this, it's very much a, a sieve between kind of that very real, like we're doing real professional stuff here, talking about how militaries might engage in actual combat. And, over here we're replaying our favorite battles from World War II or whatever.
Mm,
And so I think that's the interesting kind of intersection in the gaming space that a lot of people may not be aware as it exists because it's there. And so I think because of that interconnectedness, there's definitely stuff that goes back and forth between those communities. I've seen and heard of more and more kind of hobby-ish and almost Euro style mechanisms being brought into wargaming, both in the hobby space, but also into that professional space as a way to
mm,
make those games more accessible for the folks who are training in those scenarios, right? Not full on, you know, Euro stuff, but there's definitely ways in which more gamey mechanics are being brought into like what historically would have been more professional settings, and vice versa. So I think that there's very real ways in which those boundaries are crossed. I think also I think about other systems in our world, where gamification is a thing. I work in um, for-profit education and in my day job, and we're constantly talking about gamifying stuff, right?
mm,
And how to gamify learning and stuff like that. And I think a lot of that, there's a large conversation around Duolingo as an app that has successfully gamified learning. But when you really look at it, like, is Duolingo an effective learning tool? Or is it just a game that people are playing in another language, right? Do people significantly learn languages based on doing this 30 seconds a day of tapping on an app? So I think there's a lot of ways in which games infiltrate and game concepts infiltrate various aspects of our world. I think, Zoe, you and I have also talked about like maybe, I think it was us, college admissions stuff and like law school admissions stuff.
Oh
mm,
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
in the gamification of like the admissions process and how those models can be used for people to try to like play that game to get us the exact right thing in order to go to the right school and those kinds of things. So I think there's weird subtle ways in which I think game theory impacts real life and breaches that veil, to use the terminology of the evening. Um, and I think that then games themselves try to model those events from real life, right? And so there's this weird cyclical thing happening that I haven't completely worked out, but definitely uh, exists. I think specifically about something like the stock market, right? Like
mm,
there's all kinds of game theory involved in prospecting in the stock market and trying to figure out, because the stock market is entirely built on perception, the perception of what is valuable and what is not. And there's definitely game theory concepts being applied by major investment firms to play the stock market in the right ways, to bet on volatility or stability, to bet on which sectors of the economy are going to grow or not, and projecting confidence in a particular stock in order to drive it up, and so things like that. And so I think there's lots of psychology and game theory that's being used in those very real world scenarios that I think we can learn from as designers to then be mindful of what we are modeling in our games so that we are not reinforcing some of that more negative behavior. Again, a long-winded answer, but there's a lot there to unpack.
Oh yeah, yeah. I ever since I read Engines of Anxiety, I knew metrics were like bad for stuff. I didn't realize how thoroughly like destructive they could be to
Yeah.
to like a system. How much it could like really throw a wrench in the way people are motivated, and how they could just abandon like real personal human values over like big numbers. It's
Right.
um so yeah, so part of this is that part of the reason for pushing unranked games to me is trying to push models of a world that allows space for that
Mhm.
collaboration. And hopefully, as more games like that exist and push out there, more people start seeing situations in real life where they could apply that like experience or perspective.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, because I fundamentally believe the world is not a zero-sum place, right? There's a lot of statistics out there about like, there are enough resources for everyone on the planet to live at a specific level if we were to able to distribute them properly. But there are people who believe that the world needs to be zero sum, that if other people have something that's something I do not have, and I need to accumulate that in order to have power. And so I think I really enjoy what you are doing to push back on those within the game world, but I think that's important, not just within gaming, because I'm hoping that unranked games can push people to think about the fact that these are choices we can make in the real world too. Right.
Yeah. I've always been inspired by every time designers play these types of games. It creates like a little voice in the back of their brain that goes, "Wait a second, I could make one of
Mhm.
those," and it can start doing some interesting things. And so I'm curious to see if we start seeing more historical unranked games inspired by what you've done. So I'd be excited to see that kind of thing because I guarantee you designers in those environments are playing those games you're making and designing, and they're like, "Whoa, that's weird and interesting." Just like what you mentioned earlier, the fact that like you were there's a oh you're the person that makes the weird historical games, right, or something like that. Like that's great.
Mhm.
That means you're sticking around in their brains, and then they'll make those games, and then they'll inspire others to make those games. And so hopefully we have a cool echo here. So thank you, Zoe, for being the voice that echoed to me, for example. So
Mhm.
great to have that.
Yeah, and I mean, and you know, I don't want to make any claim to being the person who's starting some sort of historical revolution of unranked games. I'm absolutely certain there are historical and war games out there that have some unranked things to them, um, prior to my time doing them. But I've been inspired by what both of you are doing, honestly, Zoe and Matthew, in terms of your designs with things like Bread and Hollow and conviction and persuasion and all those kinds of things. Vibes, lots of cool stuff going on.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Have you know how? Hmm. Just out of curiosity, how's going on this design journey impacted you as a person? Do you feel like it's impacted like how has it breached
Hmm.
the veil of your life, right? I think we talk a lot about like what we do in a way that influences others, but have you found that this has changed your way of thinking about anything or opened you up to interesting possibilities or thoughts?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'd have to sit with that one a little bit and think about it.
We have time. We'll just
I'm
let's,
sure it,
let's
just sit and wait,
yeah.
watch me ponder.
Yeah.
I'm sure that it has. I mean, just game design in general has definitely opened up my life in a lot of ways. It's something I didn't really get into until probably about a year and a half ago. Um, Designing anyways. And I very when I get super into something, I just kind of get obsessed with it and consume it really, really, really quickly. And um, so I immediately dove in to game design and absorbed as much as I possibly could and found communities like this one, like BMG, like Protospiel Online, that I felt like I could thrive in. And I feel like I've created relationships, friendships, connections with people that, like, it's hard to make friends as an adult.
Yeah.
Hard to make friends as an adult, and I've moved around a lot in my life, and so I've I don't know, I've found communities in these spaces that I didn't expect to find at this point in my life, and that's been
Hmm.
really great, and it's had a really positive um, impact on me in that way. Just meeting people, and I think it's opened up ways that I've thought about. Um, my relationships outside of game design as well, like with my family and with others, and not necessarily in terms of like unrankedness, but I think just in general, thinking more about what it's like to try to create something for people to enjoy, and watching people engage with that thing, especially a game, and being immersed in it or engaged in it. Um, I used to be really, really, really highly competitive as a game player. I was like annoyingly competitive, very bad winner, very bad loser.
Hmm.
And I think game design and specifically unranked game design has taught me to be a lot more open to just gaming and design as a learning experience and as something to try to pull something out of that game, as opposed and to learn something about the people that I'm playing with and to learn something about the subject I'm playing about, as opposed to I'm going to go into this because I want to dominate everybody at this table,
Right.
and going into it as I want to learn something from what I'm playing and from the people I'm playing with. And that has fundamentally, I think, changed me not just as a game player and designer, but as a human in interacting with other people.
I love it.
I'm I'm s-
Really good
I'm
question.
still aggressively competitive. Um,
I,
in that respect, I have not changed.
Zoe says this. So for those listening, whenever I play a game with Zoe, especially unranked, multi-victor, victorless games, you name it. You know how we were talking earlier about how like when you're being a jerk, you really are a jerk in an unranked game. Well, I am especially a jerk to Zoe in these games because Zoe talks the talk about how it is so competitive, but then in every play test we ever do, it sits around like a little angel who would never harm a fly. And so I'm like, okay, well, if you're gonna be, the good person at the table, then I got to go all in on being evil because we need to have some equilibrium here, right? So if you're going pure,
Yeah.
I'm going full force destruction. And I'm just a jerk the entire game. And I know that other players will look at me sometimes, just talking about, again, like, why do you need to do that? And I'm just being a jerk. It's always like, someone's like, why? I'm like, because I
It's
can.
it's my fault.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
no,
but
it's my fault.
I'm also in about my 75th game in a row of Root with Zoe, and it is very, very, very competitive and brutal at Root. So I can see Zoe.
Yeah, see,
It depends
it
on the
takes a zero
context of the
sum
game,
game,
I
but
think.
they'll if I have the option to not be competitive, I will be the least competitive player. But if my only option is to be competitive, oh, I'm pulling out all the stops.
Yeah.
Love it.
My
Wild.
my wife is about the least competitive person on the planet. So she'll just kind of like play. She just plays the game. And it's great because sometimes she wins and sometimes she's just like, whatever. I'm like, okay, cool, I guess. Whatever. Had a good time.
My
But
my
yeah.
game player experience in all this. There was a game of Oath I played when that first came out, and I have a friend. I love him to death. I've known him for years. When he plays games, he doesn't even victory is not even a concept that exists in his brain. And so he'll do the most absurd things ever. And in a zero sum game, if there's a player who isn't playing to win, it creates this weird dysfunction
Mhm.
and imbalance in very strange ways. But in a multi-victor game, all of that feels great. In an unranked game, that feels great. But in a zero-sum game, it's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And he's like, because I want to. I'm like, no, no. And so like these types of designs open my eyes to the fact that that player deserves to have games that they can really just exist and
Yeah,
thrive in. And so that was a cool learning moment for me personally.
that's great.
That said, I will never play Oath with him again. Um,
Yeah, and Oath can be pretty chaotic already, so that'll be
yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Brooks, thank you so much for coming on tonight and talking with us and sharing your insight and wisdom. It's always great chatting with you. Anything you'd like to share about to kind of wrap things up? Anywhere we can find you? Anywhere anything that you'd like viewers to look into that you're working on?
Um, yeah, Sykes-Picot is out. Go get it if you want it. If you're interested, it's on the Hollandspiel website. Um, and I would love to hear from you if you like the game. I'm on Bluesky and Discord as Roll Plus Fun, um, ROLLPLUSFUN. That's my name, but it's also just my human name, Brooks Barber. So you'll see me around. And I have some more games not coming out, but in the works. So look out for those, but we'll talk about those another time. So thanks, y'all. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It was really great. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for staying up late with us, everybody who joined. Marceline and Heather, thanks for coming. Glad to see y'all in the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Well, you all have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Joe.
Ciao.